The rank 7 XC's pool is very strange. While there have been some strategies capable of spamming out level 7 monsters over the years, we've gotten very few XC's monsters of this rank, with only 37 cards in the game having the rank. So today we're going to go over the absolute worst rank 7 monsters and see how bad this strategy has been throughout the game's history. And starting things off at number 10, we have Gaia Dragon the Thunder Charger. This is a wind dragon with 2600 attack and 2100 defense. It requires any 2 level 7 monsters. However, it can also be XC summoned by using any rank 5 or 6 monster you control as a material instead. Also, when it attacks a defense position monster, you inflict piercing battle damage. This is a very early XC's monster, and it really shows. It mostly competes with monsters like Gem Knight Pearl as a big vanilla you can summon from your extra deck if you need a monster with a high attack stat. Of course, the fact that these two monsters have the same attack stat should probably clue you in on how relatively weak Gaia Dragon is. The reason Pearl wasn't completely awful out the gate is that it had the best attack stat for any rank 4. So there were board states where it was a good monster to summon. This was helped a lot by the fact that making a rank 4 has always been relatively easy, with tons of cards over the years helping you spam out level 4 monsters for little to no cost, such as Goblinberg and Evil Swarm Mandragora. This means that while it was never the best card, Pearl did have use cases. In comparison, spamming level 7 monsters is still a lot more difficult than level 4s, even with powerful cards like the Dragon Rulers and Kashtira. It's still more difficult to spam rank 7 monsters than it is rank 4 monsters, so you'd want a lot more out of them. Now, it is possible to get Gaia Dragon out another way, and rank 5 and 6 monsters are a lot more viable. Cyber Dragon was spamming the board to summon Cyber Dragon Nova with some amount of consistency, so Gaia Dragon at least had something it could do there. However, this use case was never really all that great, and Cyber Dragon Nova wasn't really a big deal until Cyber Dragon Infinity came out, a much better card for it to rank up into. So Gaia Dragon remained a mostly superfluous card to put in your extra deck. However, that's not to say Gaia Dragon has always been completely unplayable. It does have a use case in very specific scenarios in the modern day, and it comes through in everyone's favorite XC's monster, Divine Arsenal AA Zeus Sky Thunder. This rank 12 XC's monster has 2 very powerful effects. It can rank up over any XC's monster as long as any XC's monster is battled this turn, and you can detach 2 materials from it to send all of the cards on the field to the graveyard, and this effect is not once per turn. An important thing to consider when playing Zeus is how many materials it will have, as you will not only need to make sure it has at least 2 materials for the effect, but if you can get it to 4 materials, the card becomes way more powerful. This can easily be accomplished by making an XC's monster, ranking it up into another XC's so it would have at least 3 materials, and then ranking that up into Zeus. This use case has made any monster that can easily rank up over another monster much better, and this is a use case that Gaia Dragon has to this day. Any deck that can make a rank 5 or 6 monster will consider the card if they really want to play Zeus and can spare an extra deck slot. Still, this is a pretty niche use case that hasn't come up that much. So, while it saves Gaia Dragon from being higher up on the list, it can't spare it from appearing here entirely. And at number 9, we have number 76 Harmonizer Gradielle. This light fairy XC's monster with 2700 attack and 2100 defense has the effect where it has the attributes of all monsters attached to it as a material, and can't be destroyed in battle or by the card effects of any monsters with the same attribute it has. Finally, as a quick effect, you can detach material to target a monster in your opponent's graveyard to add it to this card as a material, but only once per turn. This is a very cute monster, but it's too gimmicky for most scenarios. Monsters have a wide variety of attributes, so there's no guarantee that you'll be able to line up Harmonizer with your opponent's deck, especially if they're on a strategy with a variety of attributes on their monsters. Worst of all, there's the fact that protection from destruction by battle and monster effects just isn't that good. It's powerful under the right circumstances, but with kaijus and spell/trap cards that can easily remove Harmonizer, not to mention banish removal or removal that technically doesn't destroy, overall your opponent just has way too much counterplay to deal with Harmonizer in most situations, giving the card few use cases. However, few use cases aren't no use cases. The card has seen very occasional play in Kashtira as a backup tower style card if you need to play around a card such as Axis Kotaker. This rarely came up in actual games, however. The more practical use for Harmonizer Gradielle comes from Master Duel's fan favorite in our format, where it was the boss monster for decks such as World Legacy. Harmonizer in a slower format is shockingly a strong card, which is really hard to remove due to the limited card pool. Unfortunately, the TCG proper is generally far too fast for the card to ever be of use, leading to it only seeing very niche use. And at number 8, we have number 28, Titanic Moth. This is a Fire Insect Xyz monster with 2400 attack and 2200 defense. It requires any 2 level 7 monsters to make, and has the effects where, if it is the only monster you control, it can attack directly, but it deals half damage. When it inflicts damage to your opponent, you can detach 1 material to inflict 500 damage to your opponent for each card in their hand. The main issue here is simply that all Titanic Moth does is damage, and not enough for it to be particularly meaningful. Some monsters, like Update Jammer or Gustav Max, have seen play at points simply thanks to allowing for easier OTKs. However, Titanic Moth can't really be used in this way. It doesn't allow you to summon other monsters and attack directly, so finding a way to OTK with this monster is all but impossible. The burn effect has multiple issues too. For one, it's connected to the monster dealing battle damage, so you can't summon Moth, use the burn effect, and then use it as a material for something else like Gustav can. Additionally, the amount of damage it deals is in your opponent's hand. Literally, you can't deal battle damage until at least the second turn of the game, at which point your opponent will have had a chance to play out their hand already. There's a good chance your opponent has depleted their hand of most cards, so you're probably doing 1000 damage at most. All in all, the card doesn't have much use cases in the modern game, and even back when it was printed, it was already outdated. This doesn't mean the card has never seen play though. Stop me if you've heard this one before, but this card had a niche in Kashtira for a time. If you were in a rough spot, the deck could summon Titanic Moth, hit directly, and then rank up into Zeus to get rid of your opponent's board. Here, the card's ability to attack directly takes on a new purpose. Rather than being used to deal damage, you simply use it to activate Zeus's rank up requirement. This wasn't that great though, and when new extra options like SP Little Knight were released, usage of this card dropped off a cliff. Still, it did do something, so it escapes an even lower spot in the ranking. And at number 7, we have number 74, Master of Blades. This is an Earth Psychic monster with 2700 attack and 2100 defense. It requires 2 level 7 monsters, and it has the effect where, if it becomes a target of an opponent's card or effect, you can detach 1 material from it. You negate that activation, destroy that card, then you can destroy another card on the field. This card is overall fine. Targeting protection is a strong effect, and it's something that does come up often. Cards like Sprite Elf, which can give other strong monsters this effect, have been extremely difficult to deal with, as it removes a lot of easy counterplay that would otherwise exist. For example, it means that a simple infinite impermanence no longer functions as an out to the card. However, this all hinges on the idea that the card with targeting protection is something that your opponent actually has to respond to. If the card is just a big monster, then they can probably just summon monsters in defense to protect themselves, or even to just summon a bigger monster and beat over it in battle. Yes, Master Blades does have far better form of targeting protection than most, as it gets to pop something else on the board if your opponent targets it. But they can simply choose to not let you get a free 2 for 1 and never target Master Blades. While it does have a good effect, it doesn't actually do all that much when you do summon it. And even in the Xyz era, that wasn't good enough for a monster that required multiple level 7 monsters to summon. This is another card that has seen play in our format on Master Duel, as non-targeting removal is way less common there. The only commonly played card that can get around it is Torrential Tribute. Of course, in our format isn't a true competitive format, so that usage can't save Master of Blades from appearing on this list. And at number 6, we have Voloferniges, the Darkest Dragon Doomfinder. This is a dark dragon with 2500 attack and 2100 defense. It is the effect where, once per turn, you can detach 2 materials from this card to target 1 face-up card on the field, destroy it, then give a monster attack equal to that monster's level or rank times 300 if it was a monster. This is a quick effect if this card has a dragon monster as a material, but it can't be activated during the damage step. This is another card with a pretty good effect, all things considered. If you do get a dragon attached to it, it's just an interruption on your opponent's turn, which is a perfectly fine end board piece. However, requiring you to detach 2 materials from itself to activate this effect is quite harsh. This means it will only ever destroy 1 monster. So you can't summon it on your turn to break your opponent's board and keep it around for interaction on your opponent's turn. This isn't great, as it's really just not that much better than easier to summon Xyz monsters available at the time. Time period is important here, as this is quite the recent card coming out in Dawn of Majesty, alongside decks like Branded. The game was quite powerful at this time, and the ever-useful Time Thief Redoer had joined the rank 4 pool a couple of years prior. Redoer is a rank 4 that steals the top card of your opponent's deck and attaches it to itself during every standby phase, and can detach materials to use effects based on the corresponding correct card type. If you detach a monster, it vanishes to the banish zone and reappears at the end of the turn. If you detach a trap, it can spin a face-up card your opponent controls to the top of their deck. And if you detach a spell, it lets you draw a card. With cards like the Phantom Knights of Shade Brigadine, you could make sure you get a powerful form of non-targeting, non-destruction removal on top of a sticky monster that threatens to draw multiple cards and remove more threats as the turns go on. In comparison, Voloferniges has a worse form of removal, is more difficult to get out, and can be used less. It's really no contest which of these cards is more powerful. It's even worse than one of the earliest cards introduced into the rank 7 pool, number 11 Big Eye, which can target and steal an opponent's monster once per turn. While it isn't a quick effect, this can deal with more monsters as well as allowing you to turn it and the monster you stole into a link monster or something afterwards to continue your plays, or just use your opponent's own monsters against them. You could argue this should be lower on this list, as in a vacuum, the card is better than some of the cards below it. But given that it has worse options for decks than cards printed nearly a decade before it, it's certainly earned some ire. And at number 5, we have Hierophant of Prophecy. This is a dark spellcaster with 2800 attack and 2600 defense. It requires 2 level 7 spellcasters to summon, and has the effect where, once per turn, you can attach a material to destroy spell and trap cards your opponent controls up to the number of spellbook cards in your graveyard. This is a part of the Prophecy archetype, an archetype of spellcasters that interact with spellbook spell cards. This was a powerful deck in its heyday with a variety of powerful cards. However, Hierophant was never a part of the deck's success. There are a few reasons for that, starting with the fact that the deck was generally quite bad at actually summoning this card. The deck's monsters had a variety of levels, and the only level 7 monster in the deck was High Priestess of Prophecy. She could special summon herself out, and this wasn't once per turn. But Priestess also had removal built in already. Once per turn, she allowed you to banish a spellbook card from your hand to target and destroy a card on the field. Banishing a card from your hand is obviously a bigger cost than detaching a material, but giving up 2 Priestesses to summon a monster that's only marginally better at destroying certain types of cards isn't exactly an attractive prospect. You could also summon it by increasing the level of a monster over a couple of turns with Strength of Prophecy, but that's not that much better. Ultimately, the card is mostly superfluous. It is good in the situation where your opponent has a lot of set back row that you want to get rid of, and you have the material on board to summon it. But that situation is so rare that often spellbook decks opt to play other monsters in their extra deck over the Hierophant. It's not exactly an awful card, but over the years it's seen very little play for a card that was part of a historically powerful archetype, which really shows how rarely it was actually seen use. And at number 4, we have number C6, Chronomally Chaos Atlandis. This is a light machine monster with 3300 attack and defense. It requires 3 level 7 monsters to summon, and has the following effects. If you activate any of its effects, your opponent takes no further damage this turn. Once per turn, you can target an opponent's monster and equip it to this card as an equip spell that gives it 1000 attack. Also, if it has number 6 Chronomally Atlantis attached as a material, it has this effect. You can detach 3 materials from this card and send all spells equipped to it to the graveyard, and you have to send at least 1, and your opponent's life points become 100. This is from a series of cards called the Chaos Numbers, twisted versions of other Xyz monsters. They're also almost all worse than the Xyz monsters they're twisting, and that's for the simple reason that they're just so much harder to summon than their original versions. Most Xyz monsters simply require 2 monsters at the same level to summon, and the ones that don't either have some way to get around summoning them normally, very powerful effects, or sometimes both. This is important because the more materials a card requires to summon, the more it needs to do in order to be worth playing. Now, the Chaos monsters do have a trick up their sleeve, and that's a variety of rank up magic spell cards that let you summon them easier. Unfortunately, these cards have their own issues as well. The simple answer for why these cards aren't great is that they don't do anything on their own and are generally hard to actually summon. You need to already have a strategy that can facilitate summoning smaller versions of the Xyz monsters first, which may or may not be an easy thing to accomplish depending on which rank up monster you're trying to summon. Then you have to hard draw the rank up magic card because there's no way you're searching it without doing a long, convoluted, and usually quite weak combo. And then you can use another entire card to simply make one of your monsters a bit stronger. All of this is to say that for the Chaos monsters to be good, they have to have very, very powerful effects. It's not impossible. A few of the Chaos monsters did escape the inherent limits of the mechanic, but Chronomally Chaos Atlandis was sure not one of them. It has perfectly fine effects, and if it required only 2 level 7 monsters to summon, it would be a pretty good form removal that could threaten to end the game on its own with a little bit of trickery. But considering how you have to either commit 3 hard to summon monsters into it, or rely on drawing gimmicky one-off rank up spells to get it out, it just ended up not being really worth the effort to summon, when you could simply rely on more generic Xyz removal instead. There are some other Chaos Xyz monsters we didn't talk about, mostly because they're all kind of bad for the same reason. So they get to take an honorary spot on this list with Chaos Atlandis. And at number 3, we have Infinitrack Mountain Smasher. This is an Earth machine with 2100 attack and 3100 defense. It requires any 2 level 7 monsters to summon, and has the effect where, when it destroys a monster by battle, you can attach that card to it as a material. It has 2 other effects you can activate once per turn. First, you can detach a material to let it gain 1000 attack. Or if it's in your graveyard, you can tribute a machine link monster to special summon it in defense position. Mountain Smasher doesn't have outright awful effects, but in context, there's no reason to summon Infinitrack in the decks that it was designed for. Infinitrack is an Earth Machine archetype built around summoning huge, powerful Earth Machine Xyz monsters. They generally function as part of a larger Earth Machine strategy that's gotten support throughout the years. This deck does have its fair share of flaws, but one flaw it does not have is summoning monsters with high attack points. In fact, it excels in that area, able to get up to 6,000 attack monsters through its main combo in a single turn. So with that in mind, it may become obvious why the deck really doesn't need a monster that slowly, over the course of a couple of turns, can crawl over 4,000 attack points. Sure, it can theoretically get larger, but stats alone isn't enough. The only reason Earth Machine OTK was ever viable was because it was so fast, able to put out so much damage in one turn that your opponent had to respond or lose immediately. Your opponent can easily work around a Mountain Smasher attempting to slowly snowball into a massive monster. It doesn't shore up any weakness in the deck strategy, it doesn't get you to any other important cards like many other Infinitrack cards can, and it doesn't give you a better long game or anything like that to make up for it. It is, on all fronts, a monster you should never go through the effort of summoning. And at number 2, we have Ebon High Magician. This is a dark spellcaster with 2300 attack and 2000 defense, which requires 2 spellcaster monsters to summon. It has the effect where, while it has Xyz materials, you can activate a quick play spell card or a trap card from your hand during your opponent's turn by detaching a material from it on activation. Also, when it's destroyed by battle or by an opponent's card effect, if it was Xyz summoned, you can special summon a dark spellcaster monster from your hand or deck, then destroy a card on the field. This card is Dark Magician support, and the deck is good at summoning level 7 spellcasters thanks to cards like Eternal Soul that's special summoned to the field for free. However, even with this support, the card has essentially never been played competitively. This is thanks to the fact that its effects are just not worth using 2 monsters to summon. Activating spell and trap cards directly from your hand sounds cool, but it's really not as useful as you'd think. Sure, it means you won't get your interaction stopped by spell and trap removal, but you're still just as weak to monster removal. As the game has gone on and monsters have gotten more adept at interacting with your opponent, one of the upsides with spell and trap cards has become that, sometimes, they're difficult for your opponent to deal with. A simple Infinite Impermanence, or before it, Forbidden Chalice, would completely stop all your interaction, whereas if you just set it and summoned any rank 7 that actually did something, your opponent would need to find both spell and trap card removal and monster removal to answer your board. Basically, you've gone from hedging your bets to putting all of your eggs in one basket, and that's a very volatile trait. At least the magical musket archetype had this effect on spell and traps as opposed to their monsters, so they didn't lose to having their monsters negated. You know you're doing a bad job if you're making magical musket look good. The floating ability is nice, but it's something that your opponent can play around and extremely reactive, which isn't a deal breaker, but when the card essentially does nothing else, it becomes an issue. The card was better back in the day, but it's yet another rank 7 that's usually just worse than Big Eye, which is a bar that you need to clear to see play. And at number 1, we have number 7, Lucky Straight. This is a light fairy monster with 700 attack and defense. It requires 3 level 7 monsters to summon, and has the effect where you can detach an Xyz material to roll 2 6-sided die. Its attack and defense becomes equal to the higher result you rolled times 700. Then, if what you rolled added up to 7, you can do one of the following. Send all other cards to the graveyard, or special summon a monster from your hand or either graveyard, or draw 3 cards and then discard 2. The flaw with this card is extremely obvious. Not only does it require a ridiculous amount of effort to summon, but even when you do get it out, there's a very real chance of it doing literally nothing. Modulating Lucky Straight's attack points is, most of the time, pretty much irrelevant, with only one very specific exception. If you hit a 6, its attack points becomes 4200, which is enough to destroy Obelisk the Tormentor by battle, which also happens to be immune to targeting effects. This actually came up in Dragon Ruler format, as decks sometimes played Obelisk as a way to beat Dragon Rulers. Obelisk was too large for any other monsters to beat by battle, and they had no non-target removal that could deal with Obelisk consistently. At this time, the actual best answer to this was Lucky Straight, as it had an okay chance of being able to roll either a 7 and send it to the graveyard without targeting, or hit a 6 and be able to destroy it by battle. Now, realistically, this didn't come up often, as Obelisk was already a niche tech card, so playing a card just to beat Obelisk was pretty bad when the card was pretty awful for reasons we'll cover shortly. Since there was basically one time you really cared about the attack points of Lucky Straight, the real question becomes how likely are you to roll a 7 and get one of those bonus effects? On average, you roll a 7 about 1 out of 6 times, and since this effect isn't a once per turn, you get 3 chances to hit a 7. Across all 3 rolls, the likelihood that you roll a 7 at least once is about 42%. Trust me, I did the math. Having a card that will only do anything 42% of the time is pretty awful. Even if the chance was higher, there's a chance people wouldn't play the card just because the effects aren't that good. A good card to compare it to is number 67, Paradise Smasher. This is a rank 5 that requires any 2 level 5 monsters to make, and you can attach 2 materials to make both players roll 2 6-sided die. Whoever rolls higher can't attack or activate monster effects until the end of the next turn. However, you can also force one of the results to be 7. This card has become a lot more suspect recently thanks to the release of K9, a deck built around spamming out rank 5s, which was previously much more difficult. With how fast the game is now, winning the die roll essentially just wins you the game. And thanks to being able to, well, cheat, the card was good enough to need to be banned in the OCG. However, the card still had a fail case. With how the math works, if you rolled very high and your opponent rolls very low, you can tie or even lose still. This will rarely happen, as it requires rolling at least a 9 or higher while your opponent rolls far less. But it can happen. The math here is a lot more complicated, but the odds are much higher in your favor, and the payoff is literally winning immediately. On the other hand, Lucky Straight's effects are only powerful. Not game winning on most board states, just above average for a card that requires 3 monsters as materials. Considering how likely it is to backfire, and the fact that even when it did work, you still probably lost, Lucky Straight has never been played seriously ever, and honestly that's probably for the best. Considering how annoying Paradise Smasher is to play against and with, the game is probably better off for Lucky Straight only coming up in meme videos and on the playground.